There is a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when the narcissist begins to realize that something has changed. Not because you made a declaration, not because you confronted them or demanded justice, but because something in you went still. The emotional current they once relied on, your reactions, your explanations, your hope that if you just said the right thing they would finally see you, has gone quiet. And in that silence, they feel a kind of loss that is deeply destabilizing. For a long time, your emotions were part of how they regulated themselves. When you were anxious, they felt powerful. When you were confused, they felt certain. When you were trying to fix the relationship, they felt wanted. This is not love as most of us understand it. It is emotional dependence disguised as dominance. In the absence of a stable inner world, they learned to borrow yours. Your attention, your distress, even your pain became proof that they still mattered, that they still had a grip on something real. So when you stop reacting, when you stop trying to explain yourself, when you no longer ask for their validation, they experience something that feels like an emotional free fall. It's not just that they are losing you, they are losing the structure that held up their fragile sense of self. And because they have spent a lifetime avoiding their own vulnerability, they don't feel this as grief or sadness, they feel it as threat. You might notice the shift before they ever say a word. They may suddenly reach out after a long silence. They may provoke you, criticize you, or pretend to be the person you always hoped they could be. It can look like remorse, but underneath it is panic. The system that once gave them a sense of power is no longer responding. Your calm feels to them like disappearance, and in that space their false sense of control begins to crack. What's important to understand is that this change in you is not performative. You're not doing this to prove a point. You're not withholding emotion to punish them. You've simply begun to turn inward, to meet your own needs instead of trying to manage theirs. This is where real freedom begins, because the truth is, you were never meant to be the emotional regulator for someone else's unresolved pain. When you stop engaging in the cycle, you step out of a role you never consented to play. You stop being the mirror that reflects their power back to them. And without that reflection, they are left with the parts of themselves they've worked so hard to avoid. This is why your calm feels so disruptive. It's not passive, it's profound. You might feel guilt about this. You might wonder if you're being cold or unkind. But what you are actually doing is reclaiming your emotional autonomy. You are learning that you don't need chaos to feel connected, and you don't need to suffer to be seen. And that realization changes everything. The narcissist doesn't experience your silence as peace. They experience it as loss of control, not because you've won something over them, but because you've taken your life back. You are no longer organizing your inner world around their reactions. You are no longer available to be pulled into their emotional orbit. And that is the moment they begin to sense that their hold on you is gone. This is where your power truly lies, not in confrontation, not in proving your worth, but in choosing yourself without needing their permission. When you stop reacting, you stop feeding the illusion that they define you. And in that quiet space, you finally hear your own voice again. You don't win by defeating them. You win by no longer needing to. As that quiet shift takes place inside you, another realization begins to dawn on the narcissist, one that is far more unsettling than anger or blame. They start to sense that you are no longer trying to be understood by them. For someone who lives through the reflection of others, this is not a small change. It is a psychological earthquake. For years, your efforts to explain yourself, to seek clarity, to ask for empathy, kept you emotionally tethered. Even when the conversations went nowhere, the very act of engaging told them they still mattered, that they still had influence. Your need to be seen gave them a role to play. They could deny, deflect, or twist the narrative, but you kept returning, hoping for a breakthrough. That hope, as painful as it was, became art of the bond. Now, that need has softened. You no longer measure your worth by whether they finally get it. You no longer wait for their version of reality to validate your own. And the moment they realize this, something inside them collapses. Not outwardly, but internally. Because the story they told themselves depended on your participation. Without your questions, your emotional labor, your constant reaching, the illusion loses its audience. This is where the dynamic changes at its core. The narcissist has long relied on external confirmation to feel real, important, in control. Your attention was not just desired, it was essential. When you withdraw that energy, they feel exposed, as if a light has been turned on in a room they've tried to keep dark. They may not understand it in words, but they feel it in their body, the sense that you are no longer orbiting them. And this is what creates their growing unease. They may test you, offering charm, apologies, or subtle jabs, say, arching for the old response. They are trying to see if the door is still open, if the emotional circuit can be reactivated. But when you don't step back into the familiar dance, they are confronted with a truth they've spent a lifetime avoiding, that they cannot control another person's inner world. Your detachment is not indifference, it is discernment. You've learned that being emotionally available does not mean being emotionally accessible to harm. You can be compassionate without being consumed. You can understand someone's pain without making it your responsibility. This is not a hardening of the heart, it is a strengthening of the self. From a psychological perspective, what is happening is a reorganization of power. Not the power to dominate, but the power to choose. You are no longer seeking approval from someone who cannot offer it in a healthy way. You are no longer negotiating your reality to fit their comfort. And in doing so, you step into a quieter, steadier sense of self that does not rise or fall with their moods. The narcissist may sense this as distance, but it is more accurately a boundary, one that exists not to punish, but to protect. You are not disappearing, you are becoming present in your own life, and that presence is what they feel slipping away. There is something deeply liberating about realizing you don't need someone else's understanding to be whole. You don't need their acknowledgement to trust your experience. When you release the need to convince, you reclaim the right to simply be. And this is when the dynamic truly shifts, not because you've changed them, but because you've changed where you stand. You are no longer asking to be seen, you are seeing yourself. When the narcissist finally understands that you are no longer available to be pulled back into the old emotional economy, something deeper than fear emerges. It is not just the loss of control, it is the collapse of the identity they built around that control. For a long time, they define themselves through the reactions they could evoke, the chaos they could manage, the stories they could shape. Your emotional freedom threatens that identity at its root. You see, for someone shaped by early emotional deprivation or conditional love, the self is often constructed as a performance rather than a presence. The narcissistic structure is not simply arrogance, it is a defense against an unbearable sense of emptiness. Underneath the grandiosity or coldness is a child who learned that love must be earned through image, dominance, or manipulation. They do not feel real unless someone is reflecting something back to them. Admiration, fear, anger, even confusion. All of it serves the same purpose, to confirm that they exist. But when you stop reacting in predictable ways, the mirror goes dark. There is no audience to applaud, no opponent to defeat, no partner to outmaneuver. And in that silence, the narcissist is left face to face with the part of themselves why have spent their entire life running from. This is not something they consciously acknowledge, but it is felt as agitation, restlessness, and a vague sense of dread. They may lash out, withdraw, or reinvent themselves, but the discomfort follows them because the source is not external, it is within. This is the moment when the truth becomes undeniable. You were never the problem. You were part of the system that kept them from confronting their own pain. Your departure from that system is not abandonment. It is a natural consequence of growth. You have chosen not to participate in a dynamic that required you to shrink so someone else could feel large. And that choice, quiet as it may be, is revolutionary. From a philosophical standpoint, this is the shift from reaction to response, from unconscious pattern to conscious presence. You are no longer living in a state of emotional reflex, where their behavior dictates your inner world. Instead, you are rooted in something more stable. Awareness that your worth does not depend on being chosen, needed, or validated by someone who cannot offer genuine reciprocity. There is a certain grief that comes with this realization, not because you miss who they were, but because you finally see who they cannot be. You mourn the connection you hoped for, the understanding that never arrived. And in that mourning, you release the fantasy that kept you bound. This is not bitterness, it is clarity. It is the acceptance that some people are not capable of meeting you where you stand, no matter how much you love them. And yet, this clarity brings a quiet peace. You begin to notice how your body feels when you are no longer bracing for the next emotional storm. Your mind becomes less occupied with rehearsing conversations that will never resolve. You have space now, for rest, for curiosity, for relationships that do not require self-abandonment. This is not a dramatic victory. It is a gentle return to yourself. What the narcissist senses, more than anything, is that you have stepped out of the role they assigned you. You are no longer the source of their regulation, their identity, their reflection. You have become a person in your own right, with your own center of gravity. And that is something they cannot manipulate, because it does not depend on them. You have not won by defeating them. You have won by choosing yourself.